I was intrigued. Naked Bronze is a 2009 documentary directed and produced by James Bogan. The film has a 3-minute trailer on YouTube under the channel Dark River Films, who distributed the film. With one comment by Eddie Sprick, Dark River Films has 13 subscribers. The film has no reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and there are only 2 James Bogans on IMDb. I guess it's the same James Bogan who directed and produced classics like Tom Benton's Missouri, The Adventures of the Amazon Queen, and Man vs. Tree. Riveting stuff here. All of them are documentaries too, and the other Bogan produces and stars in Pet Doctors of Atlanta.
And we're gonna show you some Southern veterinary hospitality. From saving your pet's lives in the emergency room, to educating you on ways to keep your pets happy and healthy. We handle it all. We are the Pet Doctors of Atlanta. On this episode, I'm going to be giving my family a big surprise. But first, I have a long day ahead of me at the practice. A young German Shepherd comes in for a routine examination, and I discover that, uh-oh, something's missing.
So when we boot this baby up, we're greeted with a title screen, which, for 2009, the same year screens were graced with visually stunning films, Avatar, Inglourious Bastards, and District 9. I just think it says a lot about the quality we should expect here. I mean, it's in 480p, and the title is just in italicized Times New Roman. We also have this nude metal bird woman taking flight or dancing in front of the pyre of flame. Just this static, silent image. I mean, it gets the job done, but I guess I was expecting more for some reason. So my immediate thoughts are clickbait, check. A soft guitar chord eases us into the film, where we're met with some papyrus word art and another naked metal woman, with some birds in the distance. This leads into a serene montage of some of Louis Smart's Ozark Sculptor's work, and immediately I'm getting vibes. Vibes of a simpler time, when your art teacher could just show up to class hungover and put on a movie for everyone, and everyone could just nap because, you know, who the fuck cares? So we get a bodied Sapfa, another nude woman, a butt, and some other impressive works, set against a backdrop of trickling water and Midwestern fields. And while the work is beautiful, I can't help but read into, the Buddhist imagery, the bearded men, the meditative expressions, and the thick and kind of untrimmed foliage. I feel like it's rather unintentionally developing this Louis Smart character, even though we have yet to meet him. Louis Smart, more like Louis at peace, Louis at one with my aura and energies. I don't know. This sort of imagery is steeped into the more relaxed sect of my generation, to the point where my first reaction to Buddhist symbolism is, sadly, stop trying to sell me essential oils. I just bought you coffee. So will this movie be any better? Well, will this movie let me smash? Oh, God. We're introduced to our titular Louis as he explains,
I was born in the highlands of the Ozarks and grew up in an oak tree.
and I'm dead serious. This is really about as deep into Smart's biography as we ever get. This is extremely disappointing, given that this film is full of little quotes that hint at Smart being quite the character, or at least that there's more meaning to his words than what the director is actively trying to pull from him. Take the next scene, for example, where we're watching Smart work on a small mock-up of a sculpture. He mentions that the placement of the feet are really important to him, so it doesn't feel awkward.
When I look at sculpture, that's something I always look for. does this balance.
Shit!
Saw it going.
But I would have loved to hear why the feet are important, or if he has a preconception of what this is going to look like, or if he just intuitively starts from the feet and goes up from there until he's achieved that balance. So then we get a scene of him working with a live model, as he explains that he only works with the human figure because
All of the shapes that you see in nature are all in the human form. A figure reclining is a landscape. Trees, hillsides, the clouds overhead, they're all there in the human form.
he doesn't seem to be a man of many words, so I'm trying my best not to just add all of his quotes.
That's a deer bone. Found in a cave. Been used as a tool.
The film doesn't do a great job of explaining Lewis's process either. Lewis seems like a pretty soft-spoken, even cryptic person. He almost never elaborates, or maybe that could have been edited out, who knows. Like, what are all these odds and ends and bars attached to this? Lewis does address this momentarily, but if you don't have an established knowledge of this specific metal casting process, you may get a little confused. I mean, I've done some casting, and not this kind, but I remember learning about this method, and I'm still lost.
Whenever I do multiples, I put them on a tree and pour, maybe 3 on each tree so the metal feeds into all of them equally.
What? What the fuck does this mean?
Gotta have a head drain. Drain all the wax out. It's the most important part of the whole piece right here. The drain.
What kind of amateur would forget the head drain?
These are sprues, and they feed the metal in from the runners.
Right.
If your wax doesn't get out, you get carbon. And then the carbon will ignite when you pour the hot metal into it, so you get what they call blowbacks, shoot metal out.
Right. So we do learn more about the setup, but I don't even know what we're really setting up for. We then get some sick footage of the old drill Lewis got from his dad, who got it from Flash Gordon.
The drill, I inherited it from my father, and I think he might have got it from Flash Gordon.
We get more bits and pieces of Lewis's process.
I'll take these out of here tomorrow and take them over to the foundry.
There are really charming moments throughout the documentary. I love how we get small introductions to the men that help Smart out from time to time in the studio.
John Bradbury's been a friend of mine for a long time. He's always been a really careful, watchful assistant helping me. Terry Earl, he's also been helping me for quite some time. The 3 of us have been a good team together.
It's as though we should know these men or who they are or see them as significant, but the film never really elaborates on whether or not these are other artists or just, like, guys that Lewis met somewhere in the woods in the Ozarks, but I do love it nonetheless. Lewis explains that he learned casting from Eldon Taft, who tells him,
I've never seen any figurative sculpture quite like yours. He says, most sculptures are nude, but yours is naked.
What a quote. What does that mean? I have my own ideas, of course, especially since Smart's work seems to evoke this feeling of almost nonchalant freedom, and all too much stress. Eldon Taft and his influence isn't really mentioned again, but I was definitely curious as to how he shaped Lewis's practice. So I tried Googling Eldon Taft, only to find out that his name was misspelled in the subtitles. Smart is referring to the late Eldon Cecil Taft, an acclaimed sculptor and professor who studied and then taught at the University of Kansas after serving in the Air Force during World War II. I wanted to write off the misspelling as just an oversight, but there are so many weird subtitle mistakes like this throughout the entire film. But I can't believe that they misspelled such a seemingly important person's name, you know? We're treated with grand shots of more of Smart's work, but if the amateur nature of the film wasn't apparent before, it definitely is now. One of their camera operators is just recording mid-seizure here, and it makes it very difficult to appreciate the work in its fullest. This may not be noticeable on your phone, or if you don't have this in full screen, but on my TV, it just gave me a headache. We get more cryptic explanations of the process, and I have no fucking idea what's going on.
Just check and pour the drain. Drains all the wax out. Make sure there's no support blocking. These particular bricks were designed by my sculptor instructor. You can hook them together real well, and because of the round nature of the ends, flame goes around it. Flexible furnace will usually climb slowly from room temperature to 1,000 degrees in a 24-hour period. The wax goes up in smoke, is lost by the next day. You have to pack the sand around the flask to keep it from breaking out. It's kind of a second line of defense against a tidal wave of molten bronze. It's pretty much a 19th century operation around here, basically. Rodin's method on a small scale. It's a rhythm you get into, a pouring rhythm. It has to be a sequence of events, and each one has to be timed in a certain way so you don't have a period in between where there's a dead space. It could create really a problem in your casting.
Maybe he really is trying to explain the procedure, because we do learn bits and pieces, but you really have to connect the dots for yourself here. Like, this is by no means a class or a tutorial, but I'd imagine that if you're taking the time to watch this, you're somewhat interested in the methods at play here, so it's still frustrating for this to go on without any insight for, say, a budding sculptor or just anyone who's interested. There's this part about how he had to melt down this little metal man he'd made when he needed more metal one time.
I needed some extra metal, so I grabbed him up and stuck him in the crucible. This was his final fight. In the crucible, he became Molten Man. If I had it to do over again, I wouldn't have melted him down when I think back on it. But it's too late now. He gave himself to make something else. So hurrah for Molten Man.
I couldn't help but laugh at this because it is really funny, but it's so sad. I almost wish the entire film was just based around this story, really.
The divesting container is a half of a gas tank. My father pried off an old Model T Ford.
Of course it is.
At this point, the plaster mold is running around 1,000 degrees. That's one reason I prefer to pour in the winter. My hero, Rodin, pushed the limits of bodies in bronze in the 19th century.
Okay, this is another moment that could have been expanded upon, but they just kind of leave it at that. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Rodin is one of the most celebrated sculptors of the last century, famous for The Thinker, The Gates of Hell, and one of my personal favorites, the Burgers of Calais? I don't fucking know. Rodin is a huge inspiration of my own, and the way he treats his figures has made like a huge influence on my own consideration of the figure and proportion in works. And he served as an inspiration to many more. So the fact that we just glazed over Rodin's influence on Lewis's work, aside from bronze, really leaves more to be desired. He does explain later how Degas, another 20th century sculptor, influenced his work in a little greater detail, and that's appreciated, at least.
It really changed my way of working because it was so much easier to translate the figure rapidly. And precisely as possible. Things usually break off and you push them. This is flashing, which is caused by fine cracks in the mold material. It's like a fin. Whenever your mold cracks, the metal flows into the crack. Place there in a minute. Chasing, that's what they call cleaning up the bronze, getting it ready for the finish. It's better to close them up with a hammer if you can. I save the metal that's around it. These patinas I put on the metal with heat is probably the fastest way you can give a patina. You can get any gradation of color by combinations of chemicals. For instance, you get different shades, different tints of green with ammonia. And just a sharp wall, you can make something look like it's very old. I have long admired the first peoples who wandered over the Ozark Plateau.
Okay, so out of nowhere, Lewis just starts a tangent about the Native American cultures who lived in the Ozarks, and this was kind of jarring.
Tribes like the Osage crafted stone tools and arrowheads. When I find a flint knife like this here, plugs me directly into the Stone Age.
So I don't think that this tangent on Native American ideals and Chief Luther standing bear is very well framed within the context of the film.
Accepting the kinship of all creatures and acknowledging the unity of the universe of things was infusing into his being the true essence of civilization.
Say what you will about what can be gathered about Lewis's outlook on life or cultural appropriation or whatever, but I think that it's clear that he has an interest and investment in these cultures and ideals that have obviously influenced his work. But of course, the film doesn't really dig much deeper than that, and we go straight into...
In constructing the deer dancer, the more you put on, the more it comes to life. It starts dancing. I guess I got into it out of necessity. It's the only way you can preserve something that you do in a softer media is to go to bronze.
What? What the fuck does this mean?
There is a tradition around these parts that if you rub noggins with Einstein, your IQ goes up 10 points for 2 hours. The end. Finita.
Okay, so let's talk about Naked Bronze's merit as a documentary. I don't think it's a good one. The camera work was shaky and amateurish. I felt like the video quality was something akin to 2001, like a 2001 home video, not 2009. The soundtrack was nice at first, but it did get sort of draining after a while since I didn't feel like there was a ton of variety rhythmically or instrumentally. And do I feel like I've learned anything about Lewis Smart? That's hard to say, because while I feel like I know exactly the kind of guy Smart is, a real down-to-earth man with a sense of humor that's sort of hit or miss for my tastes, but he probably has some great stories that would probably take a day or two to sit through, because, God, maybe it's just the editing, but he's such a cryptic guy, like a man of few words and a lot of skill, obviously. but I learned fuck all about his practice and procedure. Sure, we got to see him work in bits and pieces of the overall process, and maybe this wasn't meant to be a tutorial. I mean, it obviously wasn't, I get that. But still, I feel frustrated that we were never even told about the lost wax process. So you remember Eldon Teft, right? So, Teft is actually credited, in his obituary at least, for bringing the lost wax casting method to higher education. Like, he created the first lost wax foundry in any university over at KU. So you'd think that with such an influential and important mentor as Teft, we'd have gotten a better explanation of the process and how it's different from other forms of casting. In the DVD extras, there were biographies for Lewis and some random-ass members of the crew, as well as a price list for some of the works included on the film, and even really high-quality images of Lewis's work, including the last known images of Molten Man. But I couldn't access this info from my PS4 where I'd watched this, since the bios and slideshows were just PDFs and JPEGs stored on the disc. But why not just implement the information from the bio in the film? Like, it seems pretty unreasonable to have to go to this document to actually learn something meaningful about Lewis after I'd invested my time in the film already. It kind of reminds me of how the original Destiny's lore was largely locked behind grimoire cards, or how Overwatch's entire story is only hinted at in the game. Ultimately, I'm really disappointed in this film. I don't know how I feel about giving this or anything a numeric rating, like a score out of 10, because of how trash they are at conveying the true value or qualities of anything. So if I had to sum it all up, this is probably how. At its 25-minute runtime, they don't really give me a lot to work with here, but it pisses me off just how little we've learned about what's going on behind Lewis Smart's head and how his influences have impacted him and why he's stayed in the Ozarks his whole life. And what does this mean?
Most sculptures are nude, but yours is naked.
So honestly, after finishing this, I'm just not satisfied. Okay, Google. How long would it take to drive to the Ozarks?
By car, the trip to Ozark Mountains is 3 hours and 44 minutes with light traffic.